Welcome back to another torch review. I have the On The Road U16 in for testing, and this was sent in via GearBest. So we'll run through the basic included items and then have a test outside and see what we think of the torch. Now this packaging on this is very similar to the M3 that I looked at, but they have changed a few things. For starters, we now have an English manual, which we didn't before, so we'll have a look at that towards the end of the unboxing, and then taking out the neoprene case, the torch is inside this. In the back section we have the micro USB cable. So this torch has the micro USB port for charging, that's one of the key differences. A couple of spare O-rings. And we have an On The Road branded wrist strap, very similar to other makers that I've looked at. Has an adjuster in the middle so you can tighten it up. The included cell is the same as the other torch I had a look at, that's a 16340. And that's a rechargeable cell. You can use the single charge ones, but obviously for micro USB charging you're really going to want to use this cell. Don't get as long a run time, but that's the way it goes with these batteries. We'll run a test on that later on. I'd only really use the single use cells for a backup on torches. They can be quite useful for that. Taking out the neoprene case, it's not a bad little case, actually provides a bit of protection, a bit different from most of the makers. You can see the body, they're calling it a titanium. It has a sort of brownish tint. I don't mind it myself. It's very similar to the M3, but the design is completely different. They've gone for a much more chunky look with this torch, larger diameter head. I'm just opening up the micro USB cover, and that's attached in the corner. Also changed the switch from a white to a black. Now, the clip can be taken off on this and reversed around. I personally leave it on the way it comes out of the box. It's fairly stiff, but once you pull it off you can fairly easily put it back on, but you have to put it into that slot. You see the groove there. If you don't, then it won't sit down properly, so you can't really rotate the clip around like you can on some of the other torches. As far as the body design goes, it's quite a nice design. Definitely feels a bit larger. It's still quite small for a torch this size, but the clip does contact the base cap a little bit when you're unscrewing it, and I also noted that the O-ring was quite thin as well. You'll see at the top there you have a spring too, so you have two springs. And that's the head removed. You can take the head section off if you want. Now the reflector on this is lightly textured. It's not as coarse as the M3 torch, but it's slightly shallower. So I'm expecting a fairly wide beam pattern off of this. This is the cool white version, but as we'll see later on, it's still fairly warm for a standard LED light. Now the anti-turn it on by accident is you have to push it for about a second to turn it on and off, and then single press through the power modes. At any time you can double press and you will go into the highest output mode. There's no instant access to the lowest level, which is rated for 2 lumens. That's about the only thing. And then triple press takes you into the strobe mode. Once you're in the strobe mode, a single press will take you through the 3 various patterns that they've included. We also have a beacon and SOS. Now a quick look through the user manual. You will notice that with the power output there's quite a jump from ultra low to low. That's around about 2 lumens to 150. That's a pretty big jump. But the lowest mode is lower than the low mode, or the ultra low rather, on the M3. That was one of my sort of minor points that I noted. You also have a battery level indicator. And the information on the USB charging is actually going to be wrong because they've given an unrealistic time for the charging, but we'll come to that anyway later on. And here's your warranty information too. This does have temperature control. That's another feature which is included. You'll notice when I screwed the base cap on there, the blue light flashed, and when the power's low the red light comes on. That will also start flashing if it gets very low. Now quick comparison to the M3. In terms of the height they're pretty much the same, but the diameter on the U16 is quite a bit bigger, particularly in the middle section there. You can see where they've enlarged it, probably to accommodate the micro USB charging. That's the way I would think of it design wise. Now submersing it underwater, no problems at all. And the cell came in just under the 700 milliamps an hour, which is a good rating for this type of cell, one of the better ratings I've had. Now charging it, I noticed the charge speeds were pretty fast, a bit on the fast side for my liking. It does drop down after a few minutes, but it starts off at over an amp. And then once your charging is finished, The LED turns to blue on the side switch. Fortunately, the termination was good. I was getting around 4.17 to 4.18, so they fixed that area over the previous M3 charger. Now the beam shots outside, you won't see the lowest levels because they're too low to pick up. Notice the tint is quite warm. Certainly warmer than most torches that I've looked at that say that are a cool LED. This one is certainly bordering onto the warm. And then on the road M3, going through the power levels on that, right up to the top level. These two are going to be around about the 700 lumens mark ish. I did a full comparison with the S1R baton from Olight with the M3, so you can have a look at that. But notice the lowest power level is a good bit lower on the U16. And the M3, you can see it's rated around about 10 lumens. So there's a big difference on the power output between these at the lowest level, and that's a welcome change. On the U16 now, we do get quite a wide beam pattern on this. You can see there is a sort of I describe it as a slightly green tint. I've noticed that visually as well as the camera picking it up. It shows up more when you've got the grass, obviously, because that's green as well. At the top level, decent power output on this, and I'm going between the two now onto the M3. There really isn't a huge difference apart from a slight difference in the tint. So I don't think there's much difference to pick between these two in terms of the power output. There's a slight minor difference due to the reflector differences, but nothing that I would find particularly important myself. Closer up beam shot. Shallow reflectors spread the light out more, and that's generally what you get with torches of this type. And a beam shot on the wall, just to give you an idea of up close distances. You can see it's fairly well diffused thanks to the texturing on the reflector. Now the 3 strobe modes, I actually quite like the beacon myself, and not all torches include them, but they're pretty handy for me if you put it on a backpack or something like that, where you won't dazzle drivers and things, but they'll be able to see you very clearly with that long pause between. So I actually like to see that on torches. Some torches still only come with a single strobe. At the top power level with the telephoto tests, all of these tests are done on all the torches that I do at the same distance, so be able to see how they compare as you'd expect with this one. Nice even spread at longer distances. And onto the tree test, the same again. So you get a more even distribution of the light with this torch. Now you'll see the big jump there, that was going from the 2 to 150. That, I wouldn't say it was a deal breaker for the price, but it is, I would have preferred an extra power level in there. That would have helped space things out a bit more evenly, or they could have put the ultra low in a separate mode on its own. The top power output is very decent for a torch of this type. It's very much in line with other makers that I've used. Looking at the roof section, you've still got a bit of range. It's not a huge range torch, but at the top level you do have decent power. Although that does start to drop down. After about a minute and a half, you'll see it gradually ramp down. Ultra low level 2 lumens, big improvement over the previous model because that was a bit bright at the 10. It's still not what most people would call a firefly or a moonlight mode. Still, I think it's low enough that most people will be happy enough with the output at that level. Now, time to come to some thoughts on the U16. Now, this is an interesting torch in a lot of ways because they've added the micro USB port, and that could be something which would appeal to some people. The M3 was a pretty good torch too. I quite liked it, but the charger that was included wasn't the best. On the other hand, with this one, the charging speed is a bit on the high side for my personal taste. I usually charge those smaller cells at around about half an amp, so I would like to see that addressed. Also felt that the O-rings were a little bit on the small side, although you're probably not going to be opening the back up. They were definitely smaller than the M3, so do keep those threads greased up. So the main appeal with this torch is that micro USB charging port, so you don't have to worry about getting a charger with this. And in terms of the performance and the output, it's pretty comparable to other torches in this price range in terms of the highest level, very similar to some of the other torches that I've looked at. I did quite an extensive review with the M3, comparing it to the Olight, so you can have a look at that and see how that compares. You get a decent little bundle. I perhaps would have changed those few things, including the output jump, but overall it's a pretty nice little torch at quite an attractive price point. It's certainly worth considering if you're looking for a very compact, pocketable torch.